Okay, I know, you got me. The title of this video is somewhat clickbait. Not entirely, but somewhat. But hey, it got you here, didn't it? So why not stay a while and actually watch and see what I have to say? After all, what are you gonna do if you don't watch the video? Go do something productive? We know you're not gonna do that. Psh. Nobody's on YouTube to do anything productive. So after thinking of a title to a video, I always do a YouTube search to see if anyone else has come up with one similar, and I actually found one that did. Synthetic Man, who I've seen before, I've actually watched some of his videos and been a subscriber, released a video, at least a live stream, where he called it Turdtree, just like I did in my title. But I have not seen that video yet, so that should not impact my opinion. Is the DLC outright terrible? Well, obviously not. Despite my griping, and moaning on X, it's not altogether bad. In fact, it's a masterfully crafted world filled with interesting designs, expansive levels, incredible vistas, and that tried and true classic From Software element of intertwining zones with verticality and useful shortcuts. So why is it a Turdtree? Well, it is and it isn't. At a glance, it might seem like an absolutely stunning and masterful work of near perfection. A true 10 out of 10, as many outlets claim it to be. But if the past 2 decades have taught us anything, it's that professional game reviewers and their far more devious counterparts, the cabal of so-called mainstream game journalists, are really anti-gamer propagandists, staunch left-wing ideologues who are only passing through the gaming space to inject and spread their hateful ideology of wokeness, for lack of a better term. Ladies and gentlemen, well, actually, gentlemen, pretty much no women actually watch my videos according to the demographics, and I'm pretty sure that the few of you that selected female are still actually male, and you just picked the female option for one reason or another. I'm Fox with RealMarcFoxx, best-selling author of the world-renowned, top-hit, critically acclaimed sci-fi novel, New Tokyo, and this is your stronghold for rational, reasonable, real gamers. Let's roll the intro.
What if this is as good as it gets?
I'm not going to dote on all the great things about Shadow of the Erdtree because there are a billion videos already doing that. Like, literally, exactly 1 billion. I counted them all. It came up to exactly 1 billion. Not one more, not one less. Every other gaming outlet on the planet is giving this thing either a 10 out of 10 or a 9 out of 10. It's rare to even see it as low as an 8. Everyone seems to think it's perfect. All except for Eurogamer, who gave it 3 out of 5 stars. What are they up to? Alexa Song, what are you trying to pull here? What's going on? You just trying to get attention, or are you one of the rare game reviewers who can see the flaws in a game that is otherwise an amazing game? I don't know. Alexis, why aren't you on the Turdtree hype bandwagon like everyone else? It seems like you would just fall in line. I guess perhaps you gave a genuine opinion, and for that, you will always take criticism. So let's address the elephant in the room. I was just actually looking to see if there was a real elephant in the room. But no, it's a figure of speech. You know what I'm about to talk about. That's right, this DLC is too hard. This DLC, Shadow of the Turdtree, is brutal, masochistic, self-mutilation difficult. This DLC is without question the most difficult, the most brutal, the most overtuned DLC From Software has ever released. Yes, that's right, I'm about to start whining about how the DLC is too dang hard. And I bet you haven't heard that one before, have you? Everyone out there is saying they're not having any trouble with it at all. This is a totally unique opinion that I and only I share, and I've been looking a lot. Obviously, that's sarcasm. A lot of people have complained about the difficulty of this DLC. But you are fortunate that you have landed here on this tiny little YouTube channel where you get original, mind-blowing, incredible opinions each and every time you tune in. So don't forget to subscribe to RealMarcFoxx and hit the notification bell icon, turn on all. Also, tap that like button. Tap it. Don't slap it. Don't hit it. Don't smash it. Don't do anything bad to it. Just tap. Or click it. Click it if you have a mouse. And you know, if I ever make it big here, I won't. But if I ever make it big here on YouTube, it would be kind of funny to come back to this video and see me referring to my channel as small or tiny, because by then it would be huge. I'd have 750,000, 1 million,
1 billion subscribers.
So you know what time it is? It's time for an embarrassingly corny, hand-up dad joke style skit. So let's see it. Hello there, I'm MarcFoxx, and I'd like to welcome you to the winery. We do one thing and one thing only here. Whether you call it complaining, griping, moaning, or bitching, it's all the same thing. It's whining. That's what we do best here at the winery. So let's get ready to wine. I'll see you there. I can only imagine that Miyazaki was faced with a dilemma. After having spent nearly 2.5 years on the first DLC to what is arguably his biggest, most popular game ever, he had massive expectations to live up to. I don't envy that. As a content creator myself, not only on YouTube, but also in the form of my novel New Tokyo, available on Amazon in paperback, Kindle, and Kindle Unlimited, I can't imagine the level of stress he was under to produce another product that would at least be on par with the base game, if not far greater. So the challenge for Miyazaki was in how to handle the legacy of his Soulsborne-style games. That is, challenge. How could the DLC for Elden Ring not be challenging? Of course, it'd have to be. He has to make it hard, right? Because the whole idea behind his games is you die, and you die a lot, right? Wrong. You see, one of the purposes of his games, according to the man himself, Miyazaki, is not necessarily to kill the player, but to give the player a challenge for which he feels satisfied after having completed. Not simply to kill the player with gotcha moments or extreme, brutal, masochistic difficulty, but to give the player a fair and balanced challenge that makes him feel like he actually accomplished something, at least in the game. So, with so many players coming in at such high levels, how would he ensure that everyone would face a challenge commensurate with the legacy he had established? To be honest, I don't think there is a genuinely good way to do this. There's no way to accommodate the whole of a player base of varying levels and builds, some of which would obviously be incredibly powerful and finely tuned. Instead of making a DLC similar to all the previous Soulsborne expansions in the past, Miyazaki's goal was to try something new and different. I wish I could tell you it was a success, but it wasn't. Not in my opinion. Critically, yes, it's a success. I can't deny that. It is a critical success. It is a financial success. But is it a success in terms of the ideas he've implemented as a quality issue? And I don't think so. I am a long-time Souls fan. I started by playing Dark Souls when it was new. It had just been released. I went and picked it up sight unseen, haven't even watched a video. I just read one article about it and said, you know what? I'm gonna try it. Went into the store, plopped down $60, boom, took it home, started playing. I got a PlayStation 3, then went back and played Demon Souls. I played Dark Souls 2 on release, Dark Souls 3 on release, Bloodborne on release, Sekiro on release, although I don't consider that a Soulsborne game. I played, obviously, Elden Ring on release. I have played all of the Soulsborne games, and I've played through them all multiple times. I've played all the expansions to all of them, even Dark Souls 2, which we all know was essentially garbage. So this opinion is not coming from someone who just came to Elden Ring and was like, oh wow, this From Software company exists. No, I'm not new to any of this. I've been around for a long time. Check my YouTube channel. You will see content about the Souls series from, I think, 12, 13 years ago at this point, starting with the release of Dark Souls. So I am by no means new to any of this. So when I say this, it is with all of that history behind me, all of that knowledge and love for most of From Software's more recent games. I found Shadow of the Erdtree to be the most disappointing DLC From Software has ever released. Beyond the balance and difficulty issues of the DLC, this expansion took them nearly 2.5 years to complete. Releasing the first DLC for a game well over 2 years after its release feels kinda stupid. That's a ridiculously long time. They could have an entirely new game out in that time frame, which could have been a sequel, a prequel, or an entirely separate game altogether. In fact, my theory is that they wanted to do a sequel to Elden Ring, but were concerned that they didn't have enough original ideas and content to justify putting a 2 after the name. So, in order to assuage the accusations of laziness and recycled content, they just released the sequel as an expansion to the original, warding off criticisms that it didn't meet the expectations of a new game in the series. This is, however, just a theory of mine, and it is purely speculative on my part. Consider it a mostly baseless accusation. But again, I base this in part on the size and scope of the DLC, plus the time frame it took them to finish it. So, what's wrong with the difficulty and balance in Shadow of the Erdtree? Let's start with the Turdtree fragments, sometimes referred to as Turdtree, or as I like to call them, Scooby-Doo fragments, because no one seems to know how to pronounce this. I don't know why, but for some reason From Software likes to occasionally use ancient, outdated spellings for words, even though those words can be found elsewhere in the game spelled normally the modern way. Shadow, spelled S-H-A-D-O-W, is found all throughout the game and even in the DLC's title, but for the fragments, they want to do some old weird spelling of S-C-A-D-U, which I think, and this is my theory, is just supposed to be pronounced Turdtree. But again, why spell it that way? Why not just say Turdtree fragments? That would be better, because everyone's out here going Skidoo fragments, Scadoo fragments, Skidoo, Scooby-Doo fragments, Shoodoo fragments. Nobody knows how to pronounce this. This is stupid. Just give us the word as it should be. Turdtree fragments. Anyway, I hate this new Turdtree fragment system. I passionately hate it. I think it's absolutely terrible, and it ranks up there as possibly the worst idea Miyazaki has ever implemented in a Soulsborne game thus far. The Turdtree system, in addition to being odd and feeling like a lazy stopgap solution, nullifies the entire purpose of building up your character. It's as if everyone is reset to nothing and you just have to collect and use one item to get your character to the proper offense and defense. If you want to do even a remotely reasonable amount of damage to bosses in the game, and even many tough normal enemies, you have to collect a significant number of these things. The system was so broken initially that From Software came out with a quick hotfix patch to correct the scaling of these Turdtree fragments, because even Miyazaki and his team realized they screwed it up. So one thing to keep in mind is a lot of the get good crowd out there who takes pride in being good at a video game, which is fine, there's nothing wrong with that, but I can tell you one thing right now, being good at a video game will never make you a badass in real life. You will never be a badass in real life because of your skill in a video game. At least not in the sense of being a tough guy or strong or courageous. You think of people who've gone to war. You think of people who rush into buildings where there's an active shooter killing everyone that they can kill. This is totally different. Video games will never make you a badass. So all the get good aside, these people, when they say skill issue or get good to every complaint you have, start with the presumption that From Software is perfect. Because if From Software was not perfect, they would not respond each and every time with get good skill issue. They would respond to some of the things with, oh yeah, From Software kind of screwed that up, or yeah, I don't agree with how From Software did this. You see, the only meaning you can derive from them insisting you must always get good is that From Software is 100% good and never screws up. But yet, here they are, fixing their game, admitting, hey, this wasn't right, we didn't want it this way, it didn't work out the way we wanted, we're patching this to fix it. They don't patch a game that works perfectly as intended. They patched it pretty darn quickly. I think they just realized after watching players, you know what? We went overboard. We made this too hard. You know, going into some fights without these fragments means you're going to be dealing the equivalent of chip damage. Teeny tiny bits of the boss's health bar that you can barely even see with the naked eye. Meanwhile, if you take even a single hit, expect to lose upwards of a quarter, half, or even all of your health. Many of these bosses can 2 or even 1-shot you into oblivion. and any boss combo that causes you to be staggered and necessarily take subsequent hits aren't meaningfully any different than a one-shot. If a 3-hit combo always staggers you in such a way that you can't get out of it after the first hit, it's effectively just a one-shot. You can't escape. Same for grab attacks that do multiple hits of damage. Since you can't break free, it's no different from a single attack with all that damage wrapped up into one single attack. One or two-shotting players is obviously going to make the game difficult. You are essentially forcing the player to be perfect or nearly perfect, especially when you consider what else I'm about to say here. Whether it's a normal tough mob or a boss, you'll find the following tactics to ensure the vast majority of players will die repeatedly over and over again. Overpowered attacks with absurdly high damage output. Massively inflated boss health bars, wild flailing attacks with excessively high combos, gap closing attacks that rush down the player, unnaturally, awkwardly delayed attacks designed to trick players into evading too early and then to catch them mid-evasion with a second or third attack, extremely accurate and precise player tracking attacks, tons of ranged attacks and massive AoEs, large flashy effects that obscure the player's view and make it hard to see what's going on, ultra-fast movement and attack speeds. Given all this, players are blasted with an endless stream of overpowered attacks that can kill them in just 1 or 2 shots. Yet some of these combos are upwards of 5 or more non-stop attacks in a wild, flailing manner that makes gauging how to dodge or parry nearly impossible without time-consuming trial and error. Perusing social media like X and Reddit, I find lots of players feeling the need to collect a large amount of these Erdtree fragments just to have any chance at all of beating bosses. Not only that, but many players are, for the first time since starting their character, feeling like they have to respec to succeed. I never once felt like I had to respec my character to be able to beat anything in the base game, perhaps with the exception of Millennia. I felt like almost any build within reason was viable as long as the player exercised a decent amount of skill. But not so with Shadow of the Erdtree. So many players trying to get advice about how to min-max their builds to optimize every bit of defense and offense they can in order to have any chance at all of beating bosses, even with summons, should be an indicator of something. Players are throwing themselves repeatedly at the same fights over and over and over and over, and still feeling like they aren't making any headway. Then you go online and see people using absurdly powerful and specific builds to essentially cheese the fights, and say to yourself, well, I guess that's what I have to do now. I have to change my build to this cheesy, overpowered build in order to succeed. I feel like this whole DLC just invalidates normal melee builds. You have to stack bleed, max out the most powerful spells, or optimize the use of perfumes and pots for specific fights in order to overcome with just insane burst damage. That's what this DLC is all about. You have to get the burst damage and just maximize it. Do as much damage as possible in a single hit. 14,000 health in one shot with perfumes. Is this what the game is supposed to be about? Is this where Miyazaki wanted to take us? Is that skill? Seriously, is it skill to just put on a whole bunch of buffs, walk into the fight, dead? You've seen it. I've seen it. They can kill the final boss of the DLC in seconds with one shot by simply super buffing and maxing out burst damage. If you don't have incredible burst damage, you will have one hell of a time with this DLC. It will not be easy. But if you've got incredible burst damage, maxed out bleed, stuff like that, then you know what? It's not that hard. If you collect all the Erdtree fragments, or at least a significant number, it gets much, much easier. And so this gives you the false impression that just you suck, but actually, maybe Miyazaki sucked when he created the Erdtree fragment system. You also know it's dumb because it only works in the DLC. It doesn't apply anywhere else in the game. So when you leave the DLC and go to any other portion of the base game, well, guess what? Your damage and your defense are not consistent across the board. You have this almost separate character in the DLC versus in the base game. Another indicator that this may have been intended to be a sequel or a spin-off, a separate game entirely. I'm sorry, but this isn't fun for me. That's not what I play these games for. I know for some of you it is fun. You like building the min-max build to get the maximum amount of burst damage possible, but that's not me. I don't like build variety being distilled down to a handful of super specific and overpowered specs. When you can barely get 1 or 2 hits in on a boss before he goes back into another series of 16 freaking hits all in a row, basic melee builds lose out every time to burst damage builds. It's now about maximizing the damage you can do in one single brief moment, since that's all you have before the next round of absurdly fast, wild, flailing attacks comes barreling down upon you. The imbalance of difficulty and challenge was so bad initially that Elden Ring fell to a mixed score on Steam, with many people complaining about the difficulty, but that's not all. Elden Ring's stuttering and performance issues got exponentially worse with the DLC, not better. They didn't fix the performance issues, they made them worse. Not only is the game still unnecessarily locked to a stupidly low 60 frames per second on PC, but it fails to accommodate many basic features that should be taken for granted nowadays. Widescreen support? Nope. Frame generation? Nope. Ray tracing? Yeah, but it's so broken that even on the most powerful machines, it tanks your frame rate. People with 4090 graphics cards, some of the most powerful cards you can buy, with the bleeding edge technology in their computers that cost upwards of 4 or 5 grand, cannot get the ray tracing in this game to function in such a way that it doesn't tank the frame rate. So here's my question. Who the hell is this designed for? If the most powerful PCs in the world can barely run the ray tracing and still get frame drops below 60, who did they put this feature in for? Just turn that crap off. And texture popping is worse than ever, with some higher res textures coming into view when you're literally standing on top of them. Roaming the countryside makes it painfully obvious, as many of the overused ghostly tombstones just appear out of nowhere suddenly as you're moving along. None of this is necessary on a reasonably powerful PC. Yet there's no way to stop it, or fix it, or correct it. The use of easy anti-cheat renders most mods unusable for online play, including anything that gives you a reasonable frame rate or fixes the issues like texture pop-in. And as I've mentioned, the game stutters like all hell. As I played it, my son constantly commented on how it kept jerking and pausing the action briefly. I tried implementing a variety of fixes, but none seemed to fix it entirely. There is just no reason for the level of stutter, low FPS cap, frame rate inconsistency, lack of widescreen support, texture pop-in, and lack of modern graphics features like frame generation. No excuse from Software. Digital Foundry, despite being full of woke soy boys, did do a pretty good job evaluating the game on this level. They blasted Shadow of the Erdtree for not only failing to improve on the base game, but actually making it worse. 10 out of 10? 10 out of 10?
10 out of 10.
Give me a break, 10 out of 10. Not a chance. There is no way, absolutely no way, that this should be getting 10 out of 10s across the board from so many critics. What is wrong with you guys? Are you not paying attention? Do your eyeballs not work? Do you not see all the problems with this game? 10 out of 10. Many of these technical issues wouldn't feel so bad if it weren't for the try-hard effort by Miyazaki to make the game difficult above everything else, even being fun. Yes, the challenge is often fun, but this is brutal. This is sadistic. This is masochistic. I believe Miyazaki sacrificed fun and balance for pure, brutal difficulty. This was never what Souls was about, even according to Miyazaki himself. This is what Tanimura did in Dark Souls 2. He just inundated the player with mobs and mobs of enemies. He threw enemies at you that were ridiculously powerful. He just took enemies and said, you know what? We'll just copy paste and throw 7 of them at you all at once. He didn't understand the core of the fun of a fair and balanced challenge that you felt satisfied in completing. Rather, Tanimura tried to just overwhelm you with difficulty, and even if you did get through it, you felt it was a certain element of luck. But in all fairness, the game wasn't entirely Tanimura's fault. After all, Shibuya started as the lead director, and then part of the way through to the design of the game, they went ahead and switched over to Tanimura, so he had to try to piece it together from what was already existing. So he essentially took assets and cutscenes and characters and all sorts of things that pre-existed his role in the game and had to sort of retrofit them to his new direction for the game. So, in all fairness to Tanimura, it wasn't entirely his fault. But when he had a chance to correct things and he went to that whole stupid Scholar of the First Sin edition, he literally made the game
Worse.
in almost every possible way. I'm sorry, but I passionately hate Tanimura's design in Dark Souls 2.
Passionately.
So I went on a bit of a tirade on X about this. I compared it to the terrible difficulty strategy used by Tanimura, as I described, even saying that it was like Tanimura taking a diarrhea dump straight into your mouth. I stand by what I said there. Some of this is just Dark Souls 2 on steroids, and that's a bad thing. Dark Souls 2 was an absolute mess. Though honestly, I was also having some diarrhea of my own. Diarrhea of the mouth, or rather, typing hands. Just look at some of these posts I let loose with. Woo! Don't mind me while I go apply some butthurt cream. Oh. oh, okay. That one is not good at all. We'll just delete that. We'll say that one never happened. And hey, don't forget to follow me on X, because that is where I spend the vast majority of my social media time. Follow me at RealMarcFoxx on X, link in the description down below, and let's have a conversation. Shoot me a tweet. I usually respond to all of them as long as they're not too mean. Got like an eyelash that's hanging off and I can see it. Let's take a step back from all that and talk a bit about my gaming history. I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and my first memories of playing video games were mainly on the computer. I would go to my grandma and grandpa's house, where my parents would leave me when they were both working, and I would play on my grandpa's computer. I played on a computer as early as the Commodore 64. I remember playing a game, really not a game, software called Dr. Sabetzo, which had a voice synthesizer, and you could type and then it would respond to you verbally, and it was supposed to be like a psychiatrist.
Hello, Chekhov. My name is Dr. Sabetzo. I am here to help you. Say whatever is in your mind freely. Our conversation will be kept in strict confidence. Memory contents will be wiped off after you leave. So, tell me about your problems.
And all it did really was parrot back what you said and say things like, that's interesting, tell me more. But it was actually really cool. I also remember using an Atari 2600 gamepad. Of course, I don't have one of those, but I remember distinctly when my uncle came over to my grandpa and grandma's house and hooked up his Atari 2600, and I played Burger Time on it. That was a lot of fun, and that, I think, is where I really got hooked on video games. I would play flight simulators on my grandpa's computer. I would play with the Gravis gamepad. Yeah, who remembers that? The Gravis gamepad. It had a directional pad, and in the center of the directional pad was a screw opening, and you could screw in like a stick to get more of the arcade stick kind of style. But for the most part, I grew up playing on a controller that looked almost exactly like this. This is a facsimile. It's not officially a Nintendo NES controller, though it looks like one. I had essentially two game function buttons. There was a start and select that generally paused or went into the menus, and then a D-pad. That was it. This is how I learned to play games. There are no shoulder buttons, and more importantly, there are no analog sticks. Nowadays, of course, we have four shoulder buttons and 2 analog sticks, 4 face buttons with a couple more, and sometimes a touchpad and other crazy things on these controllers. What I mean to get at here is to say, I'm in my 40s. I learned how to play games on an NES controller for the most part, and also on keyboard and mouse. I don't think I could ultimately learn to compete with the younger people nowadays who grew up with the dual analog stick controllers. They learned to use these controllers from as far back as their memory can go. My son is playing Zelda on the Switch, and that's essentially the modern controller style. So he will probably grow up to be better than me at video games, at least with a gamepad. I'm still pretty good with that keyboard and mouse because that's a far more accurate system, for the most part. And that is to say, I may never be as good as these new guys. because learning a skill later in life is not the same as learning it young. It's like learning a language. You can learn a language as an adult, but you typically will always have the accent. You'll always have that heavy accent and never quite get the pronunciation perfect. But kids who learn a foreign language when they're young, or a separate language, will ultimately sound like natives. And that's because your brain, as it develops, starts to lock you out of certain opportunities. And while that doesn't mean you should give up on anything, it does mean that you may never achieve the level of fluency or perfection that you would have had you started when you were little. People who start playing piano when they're young, really young, like 5 or 6, well, they may end up becoming far better than someone who starts when they're 40, no matter how hard that 40-year-old tries. And in this way, I'm going to say this. I try to get good, and the more I focus, the better I get. But ultimately, I feel like if the games keep going in this direction, where we're looking at, 100, 150 milliseconds of accuracy needed, very precise timing and turning of analog sticks, I may never achieve that level. And I'm okay with that, but at the same time, that means I have to hear a lot of get good and skill issue. And to some degree, it may be that, but in the end, I want these games to have more controlled enemy movements. I don't want the wild, flailing, crazy movements where I can't tell what part of it's going to hit me or which portion of the AoE is going to damage me. I don't like the fact that some of the fire doesn't hurt, but some of it does, or you can just jump up and then land in the fire and the fire doesn't hurt you because the hitbox for the fire was only at the very start. Some of that stuff doesn't make sense to me. I want the visual of what I'm seeing to represent what's actually happening in the game. So if the tail of the dragon swipes across me, I don't want it to just move me, it should hurt me. But sometimes it just moves my character because I'm not within the hitbox portion of the tail. And that stuff confuses me and also makes it difficult for me to figure out what's going on. In the end, yes, we all have our different opinions, but for me, I honestly believe that this is the wrong direction for Miyazaki to take these games. I think we need to take a step back and ask, should Miyazaki take a break? And to that answer, I would say yes. Miyazaki himself said he'd like to try his hand at other genres, such as JRPGs. And while many of you will think, oh no, hold on now, let me say this. Miyazaki would likely do it very differently than other developers. I would like to see what he would do with a JRPG. I don't think he'd do the typical anime manga style story with spiky-haired adolescent heroes. He might do a dark fantasy JRPG with far less story, far less talking, far fewer cutscenes, and a lot more in-game lore and item descriptions and stuff to discover for yourself. I think Miyazaki could be really good at making other games. And so with that potential being there, and with him pushing himself to the utter limits of what he thinks he can accomplish with this current genre, which he himself said that's what he did, I think it's time for Miyazaki to move on to something else. Not permanently. I'm not saying he can't go back to making Soulsborne-style games. I'm just saying, take a break from these, go to something else, try something else, and then come back, and maybe, just maybe, he'll create a more reasonably balanced challenge rather than going all the way overboard, like I feel he did with Elden Ring, Shadow of the Erdtree. You know, I have to say, not everyone who plays these games wants to dedicate dozens and dozens of hours of their lives to smashing their head against the same wall over and over and over and over to try to achieve some degree of perfection. That's not necessarily what most people want to do. I'm sorry, but I have a family. I have a social life. I have a house, I have a full-time career, I have other hobbies. I have so many things I need to do in my life that spending 24 hours simply fighting one boss is just too much. So I guess I'm just disappointed that in the end, these games are going in a different direction than what I can follow. Is that Miyazaki's fault? Yes, but also no, because it's my life situation. If you're young and don't have any obligations, maybe you can spend all day long playing this game, and your perspective is, well, Mark, you just need to get good, try harder, practice more. I don't have time to spend that much time practicing, you know? This isn't my job. If this were my job, then I could play it more. But it's not. This is a hobby. You know, if you stuck with me to the end, then you're a real trooper. why don't you consider joining the channel for $1.99 a month? You can become a real gamer and get access to emojis and badges. If you become a super real gamer, well, that's only $3.99, and you will get advanced access to my videos before anyone else sees them. And a huge special thank you to Super Real Gamer Drunken Dwarf and Real Gamer Cornelius Noland. I want to thank you so much for joining me. Subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, leave your comment down below, follow me on X, and as always, my friends, for Fox's sake, stay real, keep playing, and never forget, yesterday's tomorrow is today's today.
Thing sucks!
People are suffering. People are dying. This is all wrong.